Hello, I'm Jeff Ziegler, Dean of Academics at Pinnacle Classical Academy here in Shelby. I'm joined by Dan Sanchez, who spoke today to our high school students about the revolutionary ideas that framed the Constitution. Dan Sanchez is an essayist, editor, and educator. His primary topics are liberty, economics, and educational philosophy. He is a distinguished senior fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE. He created the Hazlitt Project at FEE, launched the Mises Academy at the Mises Institute, and taught writing for Praxis. He has written hundreds of essays for venues, including FEE.org, Mises.org, antiwar.com, and the Objective Standard. Mr. Sanchez, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
At Pinnacle Classical Academy, we emphasize the importance of great works of literature and primary texts, from ancient authors like Homer and Aristotle to more recent works like the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Why do you think that great works of literature and primary texts in general are important in a student's education?
Well, for one thing, I think that the primary texts contain some of the most beautiful and eloquent language that has ever been written by human authors. And it really helps students to learn what beautiful and eloquent text looks like. It's a great way of enriching one's life to just be able to appreciate that. It's also a great way to learn to write, because then you understand what you like and when you see it in your own writing, and it helps to develop you as a writer. In a lot of classical education discussions, I've heard this notion, this phrase of furnishing the mind, and I think the idea of going to source texts and especially just memorizing key passages, like, for example, we talked about the Constitution today, the preamble of the Constitution. We talked about a source text, John Locke's Two Treatises of Government. There are passages in there that are really influential and really important and really beautiful that would be, great to either memorize or just to be familiar with and know how to look up. And that really does furnish the mind, and it ultimately gives students something to work with as they learn to write, but also something to work with as they're putting together their own beliefs about things like politics and about the world. It gives them sort of building blocks for constructing what they believe.
In addition to emphasizing great works of literature and primary texts, Pinnacle Classical Academy requires its high school students to take classes in Latin, logic, and rhetoric. In your judgment, how can classical education help prepare students for college, the workplace, and more broadly for citizenship?
So I've been learning a lot more about classical education recently, and a book that you guys sent contained The Lost Tools of Learning, which is a speech that was turned into an essay by Dorothy Sayre. And in that, she talks a lot about the trivium, the three subjects as they were taught, like from ancient Greece through the Middle Ages and into the early modern period, of grammar, logic or dialectic, and rhetoric. And what I think is so great about that is that it really corresponds with how humans learn at different stages in their life. And so Sayre, talks about like the first stage of grammar, and when we hear the word grammar, we think of sort of like the rules of grammar, but we're talking about like when kids are like really young, like 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, and it wasn't that they were learning sort of like the technical terms for grammar. Really, what Dorothy Sayre was saying should be done at the time is that furnishing of the mind, of just like being exposed to great stories and facts and interesting natural history, just things about the world, to just have kids be exposed to language both in speech and in writing, so that that's actually how they learn how to speak and write correctly. So they learn the rules of grammar. They're not able to articulate them, but they're able to like act them out. And that gives them the building blocks to use in the next stage, which is the logic stage. And that's kind of sort of like more in sort of like towards the middle school. And that's where kids get really disputatious and they like to catch, especially adults, out in errors in things. And so they have the building blocks from like the facts that they learned in the grammar stage to, be playfully disputatious and exercise the use of their reasoning and the use of their logic. And then in the rhetoric stage, they put all that together and make it not just correct but persuasive. And they learn how to persuasively use facts that they learned in grammar and the logic that they learned in the logic stage to actually, persuade people of their case. And so I think that is just natural to the way people learn. So like, I think it's a great experience. So you asked about logic and you asked about Latin too. And Latin, I think, is, from what I was reading from the Sayre text, I haven't read Latin myself, but what I've heard a lot of people say is that when you're ready to actually learn the rules of a language, it's actually better to learn Latin because it's more structured and straightforward and simple than English, because English is such a hodgepodge of like, Germanic and Romance languages and stuff. And then like from the skills that you get of learning like the straightforward rules of Latin, it helps you to analyze like any language after that, and helps you to analyze your own writing, because then you can sort of like pick apart like, okay, well, I'm using this, I'm making this mistake here. It helps you identify mistakes. It helps you improve your writing too.
Okay. You spoke to our high school students today. What's your overall impression of Pinnacle Classical Academy and our students?
Very impressed. Some of the questions that people came up, that some of the students came up and asked me about like Thomas Hobbes and advice about like how to study these ideas going further. Like it was so neat to see how engaged and studious these students were. Some of the responses that I got during when I was asking them questions were really impressive. They were really well behaved. They were really respectful. So yeah, it seems like what you guys are doing here is really special.
Well, thank you. And finally, I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak to our audience about the Foundation for Economic Education.
Yes, so the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE, was founded in 1946 by Leonard E. Read, and it was really the first organization that geared towards teaching free market economics, but also in general the freedom philosophy, the philosophy of liberty in the country. And since then, a lot of similar organizations have been founded, but the inspiration almost invariably traces back to FEE, back to the Foundation for Economic Education. And that was a really significant milestone because, the ideas that I talked about in my presentation today, like the founding philosophy of the country that was expressed in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that it was largely forgotten by the time that FEE was founded. That like during the post-World War II era, it was like just everyone, the assumption was that big government won the war, big government beat the Depression. That's how they interpreted things, and big government was considered the wave of the future, and these freedom ideas were considered retrograde, or if they were even considered at all. Most people just didn't consider them at all. They didn't talk about them at all. And so FEE was fundamental in bringing that back into the conversation. And ever since then, it just steadily grew, reintroducing the ideas of liberty that the country was founded on back into the conversation. And since then, now it is an option. It's something that is actually out there, that is readily accessible to people, and I don't think we would be anywhere near that position if it wasn't for fee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sanchez, for coming to speak with us today.
Thank you, Jeff.